On March 27, 2025, President Donald Trump shocked the global auto industry by announcing a sweeping 25% tariff on all imported light-duty vehicles and auto parts. He claimed this bold move would force automakers to bring production back to the US, promising new factories and high-paying jobs. Trump argued that countries like Canada and Mexico had long taken advantage of the US, and these tariffs would finally level the playing field. The tariffs, effective in early April and May, were meant to realign the industry and put America first. But industry leaders responded with alarm, seeing the tariffs as a blunt instrument threatening to upend a finely tuned, decades-old system. Instead of a manufacturing renaissance, the policy immediately raised fears of chaos, economic damage, and a potential industry shutdown. The stage was set for a monumental clash between political ambition and economic reality. To truly grasp the panic triggered by Trump's tariffs, you first need to understand the North American auto supply chain, a vast, intricate web that stretches across the US, Canada, and Mexico. This network isn't just a series of factories. It's a living system, with parts and materials constantly flowing back and forth across borders, connecting thousands of businesses and millions of workers. Parts like engines, transmissions, and electronic systems often cross borders several times before a single car is finished. This is possible thanks to decades of economic integration, most recently under the USMCA, which was designed to keep trade smooth and efficient. Every step in the process relies on the ability to move components quickly and cheaply. For example, a car assembled in Ontario might have an engine from Michigan, seats from Quebec, and electronics from Mexico. All these parts depend on seamless, tariff-free trade to arrive just in time for assembly, minimizing costly delays and storage. Behind the scenes, logistics teams carefully coordinate shipments, using digital tracking and tight schedules to keep everything moving. Any disruption can throw the entire system into chaos. The new 25% tariff acts as a wrecking ball, compounding costs at every border crossing and creating an administrative nightmare for companies already operating on razor-thin margins. Even a part made in the US, sent to Canada for sub-assembly, and returned would be taxed multiple times, driving up prices for manufacturers, and ultimately, for consumers. This cascading tax threatens to make the entire North American production model unworkable, forcing factories to slow down, or even shut their doors as costs spiral out of control. Union leaders warned the tariffs could trigger a complete industry shutdown within weeks, as just-in-time supply chains grind to a halt, and workers face layoffs on a massive scale. The economic arteries connecting factories across the continent, highways, railways, and border crossings, are now at risk of being severed, threatening the livelihoods of millions and the future of North American manufacturing. Despite Trump's claims, automakers like Ford, GM, and Tesla quickly dismissed the idea of building new US factories in response to the tariffs. Building a plant takes years and billions, requiring policy stability, not sudden, unpredictable trade barriers. CEOs warned that the tariffs would create chaos, not jobs, and that moving production isn't as simple as flipping a switch. Existing factories in Canada and Mexico are deeply tied to local suppliers and infrastructure, making relocation financially and logistically impossible in the short term. For Tesla and others, global strategies depend on international plants to serve different markets. The tariffs disrupt this balance, complicating the ongoing transition to electric vehicles. Automakers are already investing heavily in EVs, thanks to incentives from the Inflation Reduction Act, not tariffs. The new policy only threatens the supply chains essential for both gas and electric vehicles. The financial fallout of a 25% tariff is immediate and severe. For the American auto industry, the shockwaves ripple through every stage of production, from the factory floor to the dealership lot. Executives, workers, and consumers alike are bracing for impact as the true cost of these tariffs becomes clear. Analysts estimate the average new car price for Americans could jump by $2,800 to $9,600, costs that would hit consumers directly and crush demand. For many families, the dream of owning a new car could slip out of reach, as sticker shock forces buyers to delay or abandon purchases altogether. Dealerships may see empty showrooms and shrinking sales. while the used car market faces its own price surge. Automakers remember the pain of Trump's earlier steel and aluminum tariffs, which cost Ford and GM over $800 million each per year. Those tariffs strained budgets and forced tough decisions on jobs and investment. Now the industry faces an even bigger challenge. This time, the stakes are even higher, as tariffs hit finished vehicles and high-value parts. The entire supply chain is exposed, from the smallest bolt to the most advanced electronics. Even American-made cars are packed with imported components, all now subject to the new tax. No automaker is immune, and the complexity of global sourcing means costs will rise across the board. The policy, meant to protect U.S. manufacturing, ironically makes American-assembled cars more expensive to build. Instead of boosting competitiveness, it risks making U.S. products less attractive at home and abroad. The Detroit Three are already struggling to fund the costly shift to EVs. Billions in new tariff costs threaten their future competitiveness. As they try to innovate and lead in the electric revolution, these new expenses could slow progress and put American jobs at risk. Instead of investing in innovation, companies may be forced to divert resources to manage supply chain chaos and absorb politically induced losses. The long-term cost could be a less dynamic, less competitive American auto industry, struggling to keep pace in a rapidly changing world. Wall Street's reaction to the tariffs was swift and severe. Legacy automaker stocks took a nosedive, with General Motors plunging by a staggering 7% in a single trading session, sending shockwaves through the industry. Ford and Stellantis weren't far behind, both seeing their share prices tumble, as investors scrambled to reassess the future of North American auto manufacturing. Investors viewed the tariffs as a direct and immediate threat to profitability and long-term stability, quickly pricing in billions of dollars in new costs, the potential for factory shutdowns, and the risk of a prolonged downturn in the sector. While electric vehicle makers like Tesla enjoyed brief gains as investors speculated on their ability to weather the storm, even these companies are deeply intertwined with global supply chains, and are far from immune to the ripple effects of trade disruptions. On the ground, anxiety and uncertainty swept through auto towns across Canada and the United States, as workers and their families watched the news unfold with growing concern. Union leaders moved quickly to warn workers to brace for possible layoffs, urging them to avoid major purchases and prepare for tough times ahead, as the threat of plant shutdowns loomed larger than ever. The pain wouldn't stop at the border. U.S. factories that supply Canadian plants would suddenly lose key customers, putting entire production lines at risk. Meanwhile, American plants that rely on Canadian-made parts would face immediate shortages, threatening to bring assembly lines to a grinding halt. The deeply integrated nature of the industry means that American auto workers' livelihoods are just as vulnerable as those of their Canadian counterparts, with both sides of the border facing the same uncertain future. In the end, this policy puts thousands of North American jobs in jeopardy, threatening not just paychecks, but entire communities built around the auto industry. Canada's response was swift and defiant. Prime Minister Mark Carney condemned the tariffs as an attack on Canada's economy and pledged a $1.6 billion support package for automakers and workers. Ottawa signaled it was ready to retaliate if the U.S. didn't back down. Ontario's premier noted a possible reduced tariff for vehicles with over 50% U.S. content, but this offered little relief for most. The administrative burden of proving content origin would be immense, and most cross-border trade would still face the full tariff. Canada's robust response underscores the stakes. The auto industry is a cornerstone of its economy, and a shutdown would have devastating ripple effects. The tariffs have fractured labor solidarity across the border. U.S. auto workers union leader Shawn Fain backed the tariffs, hoping they'd reshore jobs, while Canadian unions saw them as a direct threat to their livelihoods. The UAW's nationalistic stance puts it at odds with its Canadian counterparts, who warn that pain on one side of the border will inevitably hurt the other. Calls for solidarity have gone unanswered, weakening the collective power of unions. This division is a win for those seeking to undermine labor's influence. The seductive promise of bringing jobs home ignores the reality of a globally integrated industry. Ultimately, the tariffs threaten jobs on both sides of the border, destabilizing the entire North American auto system. As the industry faces a trade war, it's also navigating a historic shift to electric vehicles. Trump's claims of sparking a factory boom are unsubstantiated. Recent U.S. auto investments have been driven by Biden-era incentives, not tariffs. The EV transition has united automakers around Tesla's charging standard, promising better infrastructure. But tariffs threaten to derail this fragile progress. The capital needed for EV innovation may now be diverted to cover tariff-related losses and supply chain chaos. Consumers face higher prices and fewer choices as production lines stutter. The industry is caught between a costly trade war and the urgent need to build an electric future. The decisions made now will shape North American manufacturing for decades to come.